A new report says that the current youth unemployment rate is at levels typically only seen during recessions, even as other age groups face a more resilient labor market. CIBC analyst Andrew Grantham says that the rise in unemployment among those aged 15 to 24 has gone above and beyond what the current economic backdrop would suggest. He says that the youth jobless rate typically rises about 4 percentage points during periods of weakness. But since 2022, the youth unemployment rate has risen more than the average with a 5.5 percentage point gain. During a press conference on Wednesday, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said that temporary foreign workers are the ones responsible for taking jobs from young Canadians.
Our workers are brilliant. They are hardworking. They are determined, and they are patriotic. And there used to be a deal in this country for them. A deal that if you work hard, you get a great life. That every young person who gets out of bed in the morning, gets educated, gets a job, can start a family, own a house, not just rent one, and buy great food, meat and potatoes on the table every single night. That's how it was in Canada. Anyone who worked hard had that great life. Meanwhile, as our young people have a quarter-century high in their unemployment, Mark Carney this year is expected to bring in a record number of temporary foreign workers to take the jobs of Canadian youth, driving down our kids' wages and their ability to earn a living. So while he drives up the cost of housing, preventing them from owning homes, he drives down their wages by allowing greedy multinational corporations to bring in low-wage foreign workers that take away Canadian jobs, including in high unemployment regions of this country.
Our correspondent Wyatt Sharp joins me now in studio to discuss the rise in youth unemployment. Wyatt, thank you for the time today.
Thank you.
Now, what factors do you think are contributing to youth unemployment being so high compared to other age groups?
It's interesting, right? I think right now what you're seeing after, whether it be the COVID pandemic, maybe even, if you look to the recessions that are happening worldwide, a lot of people are scared that that could potentially happen overseas, of course, back here in Canada as well. You see, even with the Trump tariffs, for example, people are just kind of feeling pretty apathetic towards the overall state of the economy kind of writ large right now. And so young people in particular, I think, are perhaps skeptical of that. But I think more than that, when, young people are looking to get into the workforce right now, a lot of it is they don't necessarily know how to start to. And that might sound like an excuse for some people, but right now young people are coming out of university with their degree, yes, but in reality, for a lot of people, they end up getting degrees that they don't actually want a job for, that they can't find a job for. And unfortunately, that's the reality of a lot of university degrees that don't actually get talked about and that young people aren't necessarily warned about, is people aren't actually as familiar perhaps as they should be with the pathway that you need to take to get into the subsequent career path that you want to actually have. And so young people might take one degree, meanwhile the job that they want to get actually requires another degree, and then maybe they have to go back to university, and then by the time everything's all done, they have a piece of paper and tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt, and they don't actually have a job to help pay for it. So that's part of it. And then I also think a lot of it right now is young people have their sights set on things, but a lot of young people are also quite stubborn, as a young person myself, and I think a lot of it is young people have their kind of dreams and their aspirations set out, and they aren't as willing to perhaps compromise and go towards other career paths, at least in the short term, to help them work up towards the career path that they eventually want.
And how does the current youth unemployment rate compare to other times, even compared to recessions?
It's interesting, right? Because a lot of people right now are looking at the rates that we have and they're wondering, like, why is it at this level specifically right now? So I think that's the first thing that we should lay out. And again, that kind of goes back to what I was saying, is there's just so many complex issues, whether it be domestically here at home, whether it be geopolitically overseas as well, that I think are making young people kind of scared and a little bit kind of frustrated with the climate, not just politically, but socially, culturally, kind of across society as well. Right now, the unemployment rate amongst youth specifically is higher right now. If you look to just kind of the unemployment rate across the board, it's not drastically different from previous economic crises that we've seen. But I do think it's worth talking about, why are young people right now and why is the unemployment rate where it's at? And I think it's kind of a story that isn't getting talked about as much as it should. And it kind of correlates to a number of other things as well. Even if you look to young people getting their driver's license, for example, that's also at historic lows right now. If you look to young people being able to afford their first first home, that's also at historic lows. And so a lot of it, I think, and one of the perhaps underlying issues that isn't talked about is the kind of attachment between young people and technology and social media. Again, as a young person who's on social media myself, there's a lot of positives to it, but I think a lot of it is also young people kind of attach themselves to unrealistic expectations. And so, for whatever reason, a lot of the things that were perhaps typical, talking to whether it be my parents or whether it just be other adults in my life, they'll tell me stories about how when they were younger, one of the first things they wanted to do was get their driver's license. And now, amongst a lot of my peers, it just isn't something that they're
Mhm.
thinking about because they've just kind of grown attached to, again, a lot of these things that are just unrealistic or things that won't actually end up coming to fruition.
And what sectors are most impacted by youth unemployment?
It's interesting as well because I think a lot of it right now is a lot of what you're seeing, right, is the sectors that are most in need of work are the sectors where obviously they're having a hard time finding the jobs and where a lot of people, not just young people, but kind of Canadians and people domestically here at home are kind of unwilling to fulfill those jobs themselves. And I think a lot of it has to do with the productivity crisis that we're seeing in the world right now, not just in Canada, but again, kind of across the globe. And that is that a lot of people in Canada have kind of set their sights on how much money they want to make, what they're comfortable doing, and they're not willing to kind of step outside of that. And so that's why you've seen, for example, the Canadian government, needing to kind of permit unprecedented numbers of migrant workers, for example, to come into Canada and do things as simple as like various farming tasks, maybe picking apples, like a whole
Mhm.
bunch of different things that Canadians used to do, but now they're unable to do because it's just hard for them to find work. And the Canadians who are working and who are productive and who are able to kind of work hard and contribute to society, they are the ones who are getting promoted and who are already, in six-figure paying jobs, which don't leave a lot of room for young people and for other members of contributing society.
And do you think it's more of a social, economic, or political thing that's preventing young adults to step into the workforce?
Definitely a combination of all of them. If you look politically, again, I think it goes back to what's happening in the world right now. And I think young people are kind of scared, they're frustrated, they're concerned about if they do get a job, how it might be affected. For example, if you look to how various sectors have been impacted, right? Even something like the oil and gas sector, like the farming sector, governments have imposed a lot of regulations that make it hard for those types of people who are working in those types of sectors to actually be successful. So that's the political side. If you look to the cultural side, it goes back to the productivity thing because I think right now a lot of people, maybe it's kind of a result of COVID, I oftentimes talk about too, but there's certainly been a number of other things, and social media is another example of that as well, where people just aren't as productive as they once were. Hard work isn't necessarily something that's as promoted in society these days as it once was. People aren't as driven as they used to be, and I think that's really unfortunate, and in large part some of the reason why you're seeing this productivity crisis, not just in young people, but across kind of all of society. And again, that's kind of subsequently leads to the rise in unemployment that we've been seeing. And then from a social level as well, I think young people and just people in general aren't as social as they used to be. And I think right now people are concerned about their personal relationships, their personal friendships, perhaps more than, actually getting a job, because that's something that young people are kind of taught to value more in society today, whether it be in high school or in university. I don't even think this is necessarily just true to the current present moment, but for, I guess, maybe a little bit more now than it has been previously, where young people are just more concerned about making friendships and about kind of holding these
Mhm.
dynamic relationships as opposed to actually getting out there and trying to find a job in the workforce to set them up for success in the future.
And what do you think the government should be doing to counter this rise in youth unemployment?
So it's interesting because you've seen a number of kind of suggestions. One of the suggestions is maybe we should introduce subsidy programs. We've seen how that's went before. We've saw even over the course of the pandemic when the economy started to take a turn, and immediately kind of the solution was let's introduce all of these programs that are going to help kind of put an end to the cost of living crisis. There's kind of two arguments that you can make both in favor and against that. The first one is obviously that introducing these programs are inflationary. They're going to raise deficits, and that's going to likely lead to people having to pay more money. That said, and I actually remember this from when I talked to Justin Trudeau in the interview that I had done with him when he was running for prime minister at one point, and he kind of explained the reasoning for doing that, and this reason has kind of stuck with me when talking about subsidy programs. Again, something that could be a possible option here, and that is that governments borrow money at a substantially lower amount than the average population does. So if you look to over the course of the pandemic, for example, where the general population, if they had to take on money to borrow it and take out loans from the bank, they would have had to pay the interest interest rate, whatever it was at the time, whereas the government can borrow money and the interest rate that they have to pay is only 1%. And so it's either a question of, does the government take on this financial responsibility and this economic burden, or does society and citizens take it on across the board? And it's important to note that, because I think if the government takes it on, people individually aren't going to be as impacted by it. Obviously, they might have to pay higher taxes at a later time, but that would kind of be widespread and it would be distributed on like a per capita basis, so it wouldn't be as much money for each individual person. Whereas if you take away the buying power and some of the financial kind of liberties of people across society on an individual level, I think that's going to, cause some real problems. It's going to make people, again, kind of concerned, obviously, about their own personal finances. And that could make them just, you see this time and time again, if people become too stressed or too exhausted or just overworked, instead of actually working harder to try and increase their salaries or get ahead, sometimes they simply just shut down, right? They don't know what else to do and they start feeling concerned. And we saw that again over the course of the pandemic. And unfortunately, not to be all, doom and gloom, but I do think that moving forward, it will be an issue. And I think that there's a possibility, anyways, that we could see a large portion of society over the course of the next few years, anyways, starting to feel kind of impacted by this. And that's not just young people, I think kind of across society as a whole.
Well, Wyatt, thank you so much for the time and thank you for breaking that down for us.
Thanks.